There you go.
Okay. They did. Well, thank you all for being here right on the nose of 4 o'clock. I know most of you, and those I don't know, I'd like to introduce myself and Sip Talk Learn. My name is Tucker Smith, and I'm on the Welcoming Committee here. And about 4 years ago now, we decided to have Sip Talk Learn to let people get to know each other a little bit better. It's really a drinking game, but we're not doing that today. There are plenty of beverages after the talks today. We have 12 speakers, and this is our last one for this year. I already have a list forming for 2024, so look forward to January next year. How many of you have never been to a Sip Talk Learn before? Oh, wow, that's great. Well, as I said, it was started as a drinking game in Canada, in Waterloo, Canada, and it was a graduate group of students who, if you didn't finish within the 3 minutes, you had to chug what you were drinking. So I took the liberty and changed the name to Sip Talk Learn instead of Drink. And it's really been wonderful. We've had over 100 speakers since 2019 when we started. And we kept it as a wintertime thing. And then when COVID happened, we had to go on to Zoom. But today we're doing both. So welcome to those of you at home. And we're delighted you're all here. And I guarantee you've got some great stories ahead. Although I don't really know in advance what people are going to tell you. So don't blame it on me. No. They've always, every single one of them has been terrific over the 100+ people we've had, and I'm sure they will continue to be today. So we're going to start with Dave Elliott. If Dave can come on up. Oh, yes, I will give some rules while you're leaving here, David. So it's 3 minutes, and RL is going to be the timekeeper today. And the deal is that we will give you a warning after 2 minutes, and then you have 1 minute. He'll give you this to make sure. And
I'll do my job.
When you get that.
we do our best to let you finish your thought or whatever.
Okay.
But the challenge of this and the fun of Sip Talk Learn, I think, is to have to get it in there.
Okay.
So
I'll do my best.
And
I'll just say that before I start, I had a couple. I ran them by my bride, and this is the saltier of the two. Okay. So it's 1995, where I was an assistant director on Broadway. It was sort of my graduate school, live graduate school. We were doing a production of Jean Cocteau's Indiscretions, coming over from the National Theatre in London to Broadway. Starred Kathleen Turner, who you know from Body Heat and Romancing the Stone. Cynthia Nixon, who you probably know from Sex and the City, but she won a couple Tonys and has done a ton of Broadway. And just because I love this quick aside, when she was 17, she was doing Act 1 of Hurly Burly, ran 3 blocks to the Plymouth Theater to do the second act of Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing, which I think is kind of a cool aside. And the last actor in the show was the 26-year-old and then totally unknown Jude Law, who was coming over with the show from London. So we're still in previews, and Jude gets a case of laryngitis. So his doctor says, you can't speak for 48 hours. So his understudy, Jim Stanek, has never done Broadway before, is beyond excited, because sometimes you don't ever get to go on as an understudy. And he's invited his entire family, his 2 sisters, his grandparents. So we're in the theater. They're going through his blocking. He's rehearsing with the actors. He's running over some scenes when we get to the second act. Now, Act 2, he and his girlfriend in the play, which is Cynthia Nixon, to show the nature of their relationship, where they are, he emerges, this character emerges from a bathtub, stark naked, walks downstage, toweling himself up. Now, granted, this is usually Jude Law, so the ladies might have been a little more disappointed with Jim, but Jim's got to do the scene. So we get to it, and Kathleen Turner is sitting on the edge of the bed, leans over in that voice, and she goes, "Well, Jim, let's see it." To Jim's credit, in the theater with the stagehands, steps aside, goes like this, turns around like this, and Kathleen Turner leans over and she goes. So we did the show that night. Jim was terrific. The show would get nominated for 9 Tony Awards. It would run for 9 months. And because it was my first Broadway show, I have tons of memories, including Kathleen carrying my 28th birthday cake across the stage with me. I got 3 notes in the show, and meeting Jim's grandmother backstage when she told me how proud of me was, and I'll never forget, she said, "It was so wonderful to see Jim, all of Jim on stage." That's my story.
Oh, my God.
Steve Crawford? Where is he? I saw it. There he is. And after Steve will be Larry Holt. Oh, we did. Wait,
Would you like me to sit down for a moment?
I didn't know whether anybody had questions for David. I'm sorry, I should have offered that. Anyone?
I forget.
Well, save it. We can always talk about it at the end. Sorry, Steve, come on up. What color is the towel?
Steve Cropper, Weston Road with Larry, so this must be the Weston Road line up here. This is a story of how we stumbled on a government technique. So I'll start up aside from my race and gender and education, I'm incredibly privileged. And I grew up believing that I had a right to influence government, which is a huge privilege, I think. I usually call myself a grubby business person, and most of my work was in clean energy and telecom. By the way, this is not my resume, don't worry. In 1978, I asked 3 people who worked for the City of Boston government, who was the smartest person in the City of Boston government, because I wanted to work for that person. And this was in the era of Anne Finucane and Barney Frank and David Rosenblum, some really sharp people under Kevin White. So they appointed the same person. So I bugged him, and eventually he hired me. That usually happens. See, I'm very lucky. I ask people to hire me, and they do it. Fast forward, it's the winter of 2015. Remember that horrendous snowstorm? You remember what it did to the T? Remember all the angst about the trains not running and subways not running? Lots of pain and suffering. I got tired of hearing all my friends complain about the T, because one of my mentors taught me, organize, don't agonize. So I don't agonize, but she said, organize, don't agonize. So I stumbled upon a plan, and we did stumble upon this. Don't think it was brilliant, we stumbled upon it. A legislative field trip, or a field trip for state legislators to the T on the last day of winter. My then girlfriend, who didn't know what she was getting into, we managed to get 68 state senators and reps to ride either the ferries or the train or the subway on the last day of winter, so they'd get a field trip, an actual experience of what the problems were. We paired them with about 85 local media, and from start to finish, it took us 3 weeks. We got the idea, and 3 weeks later, this happened, like no long-term planning. And it was real simple. I called a friend of mine at WBUR, and I said, if I can find a legislator to ride the T on the last day of winter, would you go with them? They were like, sure. You know, media is looking for legislators. And I called the legislator who said yes. And I called WGBH, and I called more legislators. I called 85 different media and 85 different legislators. And eventually we had a party. Sort of like where you say, Fred's coming to the party, and you tell Mary that Fred's going to come to the party, you sort of pair them off. So 2 things made it work. I'll do this real quickly. We took no position on any of the issues. And that way a legislator could participate without feeling they were exposing themselves or taking a position. We didn't tell them about the budget or reorganization. We didn't tell them what they had to do. Next thing was debate. We told each legislator they'd have a reporter. What is better bait for a legislator? And I say that without disrespect, because they need to communicate. Some people would think of that as just being a media hog, but because we paired them with media, they all said yes, everyone we called. And the first-hand look trumped all the hearings and all the reports, all the dry part of government, because the legislators got cold standing on the platform. They got crowded in the subway. They saw fares not being collected, all the experiences that you could read about, but they didn't suffer it. You know, they had to get to the State House or meetings here or there. They didn't ride the T, like ever. So influenced by Governor the Tree. Next, we'd like to do it for the legal system. We'd like to have legislators go to the legal system paired up with somebody. And that's the end. Thank you.
Any questions for Steve? Or would you like to answer all the questions we have about the MTA? Right here, right now. Anybody?
Yes, sir.
Who was it that he went to work for?
So there were about 5 deputy mayors under Kevin White, And I went to a guy named David Rosenblum who ran health and hospitals
If
and
you
public
stand
health.
over there, the people on Zoom can see. Sorry.
Repeat the question.
To our Zoom audience today, we want to include you. The question was, which official in municipal government in Boston did I end up working for? And I hear somebody who's probably been paying attention to government for a long time. This was near Kevin White as mayor, and lots of deputy mayors who you all know is having careers like Barney Frank and Ann Finucane down the street. And I worked for David Rosenblum, who at age 35 was running all the public hospitals and all the health centers during the busing crisis. And he was on my board recently, and so having old friends, I keep old friends around for a long time.
Great.
Thank you.
Larry?
Another shot.
Funny not to say that. All right, since we are in an annex of the sanctuary, I thought I'd speak about faith, faith in oneself. So during the course of my lifetime, I've had 4 life or death experiences. And I think I'll talk about the last one, which occurred when I was in my mid-60s. So I was up on the coast of Maine, late September, a gorgeous day. Most of the summer traffic had dissipated. And I took my little 16-foot sailboat out for a spin in Casco Bay. The wind was strong and steady, good southwesterly breeze. I soon got out of the harbor into open water with scattered islands and was heading for the Gulf of Maine. I was tacking back and forth casually, wearing my bathing suit and a t-shirt. And at one point, as I got up to change position in the cockpit of this little Jupiter-class O'Day sailor, a strong gust of wind caught the sail on the wrong side, and the boom stopped and then swept across the cockpit, caught me in the gut, swung me out over open water, and I was like a spider on a billowing sail trying to grab something for purchase to hold on, and there was nothing. And at that point, since I had the main sheet for the mainsail tethered, suddenly the boom stopped, and I executed a back dive into the cold Maine water. And I remember keenly that shiver that went down my spine. And so I quickly tried to break the arc of the dive and pop to the surface. The sailboat was smartly underway into open water, and there was an island about a half mile away into the wind, and I had to make a choice. So having been in circumstances where I had to make decisions quickly throughout my intercollegiate athletic career, I knew enough to try to keep my mind focused and relaxed. And I gave myself 2 seconds to make the life or death decision. The decision was to swim for the boat. I remember swimming vigorously for the boat. I don't remember how long it was, but I finally did catch the boat because the sail started to luff some since the main sheet was tethered and the boat's speed slowed. And I finally caught the rudder with one hand, and I felt like I was a dead fish being dragged through the water. You want me to stop? Oh, okay. So I was exhausted, and I knew I had one more decision to make, and that was how to access the boat. Over the side or over the transom. And I decided my best bet was to access it over the transom. And I knew from long experience that I had just enough energy left for one attempt to get into the boat, and that would be it. Any subsequent attempts would result in less energy and would be futile. So I got a hold of the transom with both hands and got myself into a chin-up position, reached as deep as I could, and then started pulling myself up. My arms were shaking like taut rubber bands. I finally got to a position where with one great kick, I was able to jackknife myself over the transom and then eventually fell into the cockpit. And at that point, my body started shaking involuntarily as if I were having an epileptic fit. And that no doubt was, from the cold water that I had just experienced and the exhaustion from the swim. And I shook involuntarily for the next 20 or 25 minutes while I tried to sail before the wind back to a safe harbor.
So Ginny had a great idea that I should be introducing the speakers as we go, and also I think we should also give everybody a minute to introduce themselves and tell a little bit before they start their story. So you didn't go over, you just were going up. Larry Holden, what a story. Will you come back for your second, third story?
If I can remember.
Hope you don't have any more.
That's the important one.
Any other questions?
Yes.
This is not a judgment. Did you have a life vest on?
I'm sorry, did I what?
Did you have a life vest?
No,
I'm
I
asking
did.
because I am a sailor.
Yeah. No, I did not, and actually that would have impeded my ability to capture the boat. So I would have had to take it off in the water had I had it on.
Thanks.
Stay in main water without expiring.
Well, that was one of the factors that ran through my mind was hypothermia. I mean, the wind was probably somewhere between 10 and 15 knots. The waves were 1.5 to 2 feet with white caps. I definitely felt the cold main water. I was concerned about hypothermia. So there were a lot of factors that sort of ran through the subconscious in making that decision. I gave myself just 2 seconds to make the decision since time was of the essence. So I don't know. I know that I was exhausted by the time I reached the boat.
About 15 minutes, Mary? 15 minutes.
No, I'd say I was probably swimming for maybe 3 to 5 minutes somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And, I had been a high school swimmer, so I knew how to do the freestyle.
If you had to guess, how cold was the water?
I really don't know.
That's okay.
I mean, it was cold enough to send that shiver down my spine, and I'll never forget that feeling.
Did Sarah know where you went sailing that?
No, I didn't tell Sarah for years. Yeah, she's heard the story a few years ago. This was when I was, as I said, in my mid-60s, and it's been about 20 years since then.
All right, no more news stories.
Anything else?
Great story, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Tucker, yeah.
So I'd like to introduce Betsy Dakin, sorry. Betsy and I met when I was working at the Old Town Hall Exchange, and she came in one day about 5 years ago, I think, and she's been coming to First Parish ever since. And we're delighted to have her speak. And just say a little bit about yourself before you talk, and then tell us when you're starting.
Well, I'm not sure what it is that you want to know about me, other than I'm a fairly newcomer to Lincoln. I live at Ryan Estate, and 3 other of my neighbors down the hall and wherever on Ryan Estate are here. And I love it, just love it. And I like the church very, very much, although I'll probably still keep my membership in my home church, which is in Westwood. But I come here a lot more than there, that's for sure. Okay, what I'm gonna talk about basically is letterboxing. Is there anybody here that is a letterboxer? You're a letterboxer? You wanna come up here and take my place? Okay, but you know how much fun it is. Okay. Well, letterboxing is a hobby. It's actually my hobby obsession. And it started way back in the Victorian times in a part of England called Dartmoor, which is like very remote. And one person decided to find the most remote place possible. And he put a little box there with some calling cards. That was what they called, what we call today, contact information back then. And so he was waiting to get calling cards or people to contact him, and he waited, nothing. And he finally changed it to self-addressed postcards and waited. And finally, a few friends started finding it and sending them back. And nothing much happened except around England until the Smithsonian Magazine got wind of it, published it in 1998. And after that, a few years went by. Oh, people planted some, put some in where they lived, and even in the country. And then there was a thing called the internet. Then it mushroomed. Okay, so that's why it's now a much more popular hobby, even though only one person in this room, other than my friends over there, know anything about it. The first one that I found was in Plainville, where I used to live, and it was found by me, and then it got slowly lost. That's what happens to some of them. If someone else finds it that's not a letterboxer, they say, "What's this trash doing here?" And that's not good. Now, what you need when you go letterboxing, well, first of all, I'll show you a letterbox. This is one. This is what. This is one that I had hidden near where I used to live. And then I found out the trail was closed. So I had to sneak in anyway, grab the box and write down that it's no longer available. Notice the camel tape on it. That's so no one, we call them muggles. So no muggles take it. And inside here is a logbook with a waterproof covering. And in here is a rubber stamp. I bought this one because I didn't know how to carve. And so that's what's here. Then I take my own pack. And inside here is my own logbook, and also my own rubber stamp. which is not a hand carved one. I did a quick sketch, sent it off to a company and said, make something that looks good. It's one of those ones. Okay, like that. And also because some of the designs are different colors, I have a color box, which is all different colors to ink. And ink plus, of course, I have the usual black and brown ones. So that's what I have here. I mean, I'm done. Oh, sorry about that. I was going to tell you a couple of stories, but
Next time somebody could ask you a question about your story.
What's your best story about one of them?
you got another 3 minutes? No. The quickest one was, I was on a trail going to find some in a place called 40 Caves in Berlin, the town Berlin, not Germany. And I got up to near where the caves were, and I saw fresh claw marks on a tree. So I did not go any further. Anyone else? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Fran? And crystallize it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Liz, you're having fun. All right. Introduction. I'm an Australian. And I've been in this country for about 40 years, but I still have the accent, which I work on industrially.
Stay close to the mic.
Okay, so the story is, I come from ancient history, a time when doctors actually did house calls. And so I was 50 years ago, I just graduated from the University of Western Australia and was stationed at a regional hospital in Kalgoorlie. And Western Australia is about the size of the Western United States. And Kalgoorlie is a mining town on the edge of the Great Australian Desert, about 400, 500 miles from Perth, which is the only city in Western Australia. And so I was there, and then one Saturday morning, I got a phone call from the sister, who's a nursing sister, who was running the Warburton Mission, which was actually 700 miles away from the Kalgoorlie Regional Hospital. And she said a tribal Aboriginal had been speared, and she needed a doctor to come and see this patient. And I thought, I'm not worried about that. And she said, you're the closest doctor. It's 700 miles away. You're going to get here. So I caught a plane, Royal Flying Doctor Service, flew me out. Huh?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Okay. What you said? Yeah. And so we flew across the Australian desert. It's miles and miles, or endless miles and hours flying over this sandy desert like waves of the Sahara that you remember. And we came to Warburton Mission Station, which lies at the foot of the Warburton Mountains. And it's actually a very beautiful spot because it's the azure blue of the endless Australian outback sky with these mauve mountains below it, and then the ochre red of the Australian desert. And the Warburton Mission Station was a ramshackle operation of a few sheds. And I saw the patient in the hospital, so-called hospital. He was lying prone on a chair, surrounded by yapping dogs and numerous flies. I quickly looked at him and then realized there was not much I could do there because the spearhead had lodged deep within his buttocks. And so I was going to send him back to Perth. But I did over the years. Then the nursing sister told me that this came from a ritual spearing of which happens in the tribal Aborigines when there's dispute between the different tribes. And normally Aborigines have a communal consciousness where they take responsibility for the whole tribe and not individual responsibilities. So I reflect on that now
that I was watching the declining years of an ancient civilization or ancient culture that had lasted for 50,000 years in this desolate area, which is about 1 million square miles of the Australian continent. And I just thought I was privileged to see the sadness of a declining culture. And I reflect on it now as that's disappeared altogether.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Tell us more about the ritual that resulted in spearing your buttocks.
Well, the story was, the best part of the story was that as the culture was declining, the sort of cultural responsibility sort of shifted to more individual consciousness. And this chap decided that I didn't think I wanted to take the spear, so he started running away, and they still threw the spear and broke off the thing. But yeah, what happened to him, I don't know. He may have lived at the edge of the company or then went back. But these Aborigines, back in those days, there was a few thousand of what they call the Pitjantjatjara peoples, and they've been living there for, as I said, for 50,000 years. And they used to walk hundreds of miles. Is a nomadic existence, go and walk about. And they would go from Warburton Mission down to the coast about 400 or 500 miles to Eucla, and then they would go out to Ayers Rock, which is one of their sacred sites, and then another 400 miles back to Warburton Mission. So they would do that, and that would be their lifestyle. So it is amazing when you think about it, that they could live in this barren land. It was never, people didn't know these Pitjantjatjara people until the 1960s. And the reason they were found was there was a Woomera range where rockets were fired. So the only place they sent it out was into the desert. So that's how we discovered these people living.
So you didn't treat this man's
Yes, I did. We had to go back for surgery. I mean, I couldn't get down to pull it out. I had to go back.
and you could fly him on the plane.
Yeah.
Flat.
Yeah. Well, the Royal Flying Doctor Service covers the whole of the outback. There was a very good program on public television describing what they did. They'd fly down. Often they would go to the highway, and the cars would go out and block the highway, and the plane would land on there and pick up the patient.
Highly recommend that show.
Good, yeah. So it's pretty realistic. Okie doke.
Next, happy to introduce Crystal Ide, who was church secretary here, for those of you who didn't know that years ago.
Many years ago, yes.
Hi there. My story takes me back to World War II Germany when I was a little kid. It was about towards the end of the war, and I was born and more or less raised in Hamburg, which is, well, in northern Germany, but my mother was from Berlin, my father from a town called Prenzlau, which is above Berlin, kind of in the middle between Berlin and the Baltic Sea. And that's where we were during the war. My father thought it was a safe place, except the Russians were approaching. And my father, who had been in Hamburg, came and tried to get us onto the last train out back to Hamburg. The train station was mobbed. I was small. I had a teddy bear in one arm and a little kind of like it was a little woven suitcase the size of a lunchbox, where I had a few little toys and some underwear. and trying to, my mother, who was heavily pregnant, and my older brother were already on the train, and I had kind of gotten lost in the crowds, but they spotted me, and my father put me through the open window of the train, and I was put into the luggage rack. I fit into the luggage rack, probably the safest place to be. That's, well, I've got 1 minute, and I think crushed by people and pressed me through. Up in the luggage rack. That's about it. I've got many memories of that time, because it was well, it was horrible.
Yeah.
Not only for those who had been on the other side of the war, but for the German public itself too. Are there any questions for me? No?
Did your father get out as well?
He did. Yes, he did. Yeah, we all safely ended up back in Hamburg.
Next, I'd like to introduce Caroline Jacobs. And Joan Mansfield, you're on deck. Now, Caroline is new to the First Parish. She is a resident now over at the Commons, and we're thrilled to have you come in here. And wonderful that you're telling us a story.
Hello, everybody. I'm another one who came from another place to the US. I'm still working on my accent, but my story is about the original Lincoln and some memories that I have. I was born and brought up in Lincoln, England, the ancestral home of Chambers Russell, as you probably all know, who was instrumental in the founding of Lincoln, Massachusetts in the mid-1750s. The original Lincoln has a long history going back to the Iron Age. Remnants of the Romans, the Vikings, and the Normans still remain and can be seen today. Lincoln is the capital of Lincolnshire on the east coast of England, about 150 miles north of London. The original city was built by the Romans on the top of a hill, surrounded by flat farmland. Remnants of the city wall and the arched entrances can still be seen. The castle and imposing cathedral were built in the 11th century, and the cathedral can be seen from miles around. In the Middle Ages, Lincoln was the third largest town in England and had spread down the hill to be near the River Witham, which flows to Boston on the East Coast. When I was growing up, there was a distinct difference between the uphill and the downhill, the latter being where most of the shops and the offices were located. Lincoln High School, which I attended from kindergarten through graduation, was located halfway between uphill and downhill. After the war, we moved to a village about 5 miles from Lincoln. My father commuted every day and drove me to school in the morning, but I walked down the hill and past the shops and offices to catch the bus home. It was an all-girls school with strong affiliations with the cathedral and the Church of England. I was not particularly good at being a student, but I did enjoy sports and the Saturday competitions with other schools. I sang in the school choir, and we played a leading role in school assembly each morning. On special occasions, we sang in the cathedral. We thought we sounded so good under the vaulted roof. There wasn't much ethnic diversity in Lincoln in those days, and even now minorities only make up 8% of the population. Nevertheless, it's where I learned some of the basic lessons of life and made many friends. I did go back to visit about 20 years ago. Of course, the cathedral and the castle were still there, and so was my old school building, now used as an art school. Many of the streets were one-way or for pedestrians only, and the city boundaries had spread considerably. There's a new university downhill with 18,000 students, and all the familiar sites looked much smaller than they did when I remember them. It still amazes me that 60 years later, I find myself in Lincoln, Massachusetts. I believe it's the only Lincoln in the United States named after the English city. Any questions? Have any of you been to Lincoln, England? Yes, several of you have.
What is the population roughly?
Good question. Now, oh, I have no idea, to tell you the truth.
But considerably more than 7,000.
Oh, yes, considerably more, considerably more. That's another story. I came for 1 year, intending to travel around and then go back to England. But I loved New England so much, I stayed a bit longer. And then I married my husband. I mean, I met him first. And then... Yes, he was a Yankee. He was born in northern New Hampshire. So, yeah,
There you are.
that's the end of the, not the end of the story, the beginning of the story. Thank you very much.
Ben, it says that the population is currently a little over 100,000.
Okay.
100,000
Thank
population.
you.
Come on up, Joan. I wanted to just quickly, when I met Caroline for the first time, we talked about Lincoln and Lincolnshire. And how many of you remember John Kerr, who was here in the city? Do you all know the story of him working at Yellowstone, where he came upon a car that was dangling over the cliff? And John was first on the scene, and there were 3 people in the car from Lincolnshire. And knowing John the way we all did, he schmoozed with those people until they had no idea they were dangling off the cliff. John just kept talking about how he had been to our sisters and on and on. But enough about that, but I just wanted to tie that into the Lincoln. And this is Joan Mansfield. About that one.
Okay, so, so I've lived in Lincoln since, 1981. We bought our house from the Boyntons, and I'm a retired doctor. And this is about how I got into medical school. My first career choice hit a dead end at age 3. I had been given a cowboy outfit with chaps, pistols, a vest, and a hat, and I wore it with great pride. I loved horses, so cowboy was the obvious career choice. Then it suddenly occurred to me that I would actually have to be a cowgirl. Television cowgirls like Annie Oakley got the vest and the hat and perhaps could shoot, but they had to wear a skirt, which seemed to make no sense on a horse. Cowboys rescued people. Cowgirls at that time were decorative sidekicks who were not infrequently in need of being rescued themselves. So speaking of being rescued, I was 5 when our house caught fire. Squirrels ate the wires. The electrician put in a stronger fuse when the electricity went out. And that night I awoke to a dark room smelling strongly of smoke. I was carried out of our house by the handsome Dr. Neighbor. Fire trucks arrived and the house was saved. It registered on my young brain that doctors were helpful in emergencies and good at rescuing people. I never heard of a woman being a doctor until I was 8. Tenley Albright's name was etched on the wall of the Wormont hut at a pond where I learned to skate. My mother explained that Tenley Albright learned to skate in this pond and went on to be an Olympic figure skater and then became a doctor. I worked hard on my skating, but little progress was made. However, the idea stuck. It was possible for a woman to be a doctor. When I was 10, my family sat around our dinner table and raised a glass to my brother who'd just gotten into law school. And I said, and let's drink toward your daughter who will go to Harvard Medical School. Everyone laughed at the idea, everyone except me. At age 15, I had a regular babysitting job for the family who lived down the street. The father was always smiling and encouraging. He was a surgeon at MGH. I got the 3 kids to sleep without a fuss and went home with my 75 cents an hour pay. In college, as a biology major, I worked in Paul Ehrlich's lab doing protein analysis on California butterflies. It was not going well. There seemed to be no obvious different protein patterns in the different populations of butterflies. Then one afternoon, I made a mistake. I took out the wrong vial of homogenized butterflies. The protein pattern was spectacularly different. It turned out they were actually caterpillars. I got an A in my project, and the graduate students went on to analyze the new proteins that we'd found. Grade point averages were a big deal for those of us applying to medical school. In fact, in the age of the Vietnam draft, a grade point average which got you into medical school could save your life if you happen to be male. But that was the year in 1973 when Harvard Medical School changed its policy of severely limiting women and admitted a class of 1/3 women and 2/3 men. It turned out that the surgeon whose kids I babysat for so dutifully was on the Harvard Medical School admissions committee. So off I went to medical.
And where did you go into?
I lived in Chestnut Hill, near the Boston College.
And where did you go to undergraduate?
Stanford. Stanford.
Great.
Next, we have Lincoln resident or temporary Lincoln resident, Peter Pease, who's here to tell his story. Longer. Yeah, he's leaving in a day or two. And Vicki, you're up next.
Well, my wife Susan and I moved here in 1998.
Yeah.
94. Oh, okay. All right. So we've been here a long time and we just love it here. We moved down to Martha's Vineyard to be with my mom for her last 2 years of her life, but we can't stay away, and so we're trying to sneak back into town. I'm a lawyer, and long ago I was able to start my own firm, Berman, DiValerio and Pease, doing securities fraud and antitrust class action litigation, and I'm doing much less now. So I have a story to tell you that has 3 of my favorite things involved. Golf, which I started playing when I was 6, sneaking out onto the golf course near my house in Connecticut. Politics, got to that a little later. And music, which started when I was a kid in the choir and just been going on forever since. Love being in our choir here. So I managed to play enough golf to get pretty good at it. And back in, I'll have to ask Susan if I get the right word. But back in 2000, let's see, what was it? 2013, I managed to win the club championship at the Vineyard Golf Club, which was a new course that was set up down there. And I really loved winning that because the person who had won it for the 3 or 4 years before me was Cam Neely. So I'm on the board right under Cam. That feels pretty cool. One of the things that I always like to do is to write political satire songs, and I sing anywhere and everywhere I go. And so I'm playing for the championship, and I get to the final round, and the last guy that I have to beat in order to win is a guy named Warren Spector, who was the co-president of Bear Stearns. And my firm was co-lead counsel against Bear Stearns in the securities fraud case that was going on. We didn't talk about it, but it gave me great pleasure to take him down. He was 1 up after 15 holes, and I managed to win 16, 17, and 18, and he got really mad at me. on the 18th hole because I was being cautious because I was 1 up. But at another time, I'm on the course with my son Chris, and some of my friends stopped Barack Obama, who was going to come out and play, and they knew that I had a song which I had written by Mitt Romney's dog, Seamus. And so I'll have to sing you the song because my friends said, okay, Mr. President, wait, Peter Peace is coming up. He's a club champion. You gotta wait for him to get here so you can say hi. So he did. He waited, and I got to sing him this song. And this is Seamus Romney singing. I've got an owner, and his name is Mitt. I bet you my kennel, he's full of shit. I'm his dog, and he treats me bad. He's the worst owner I've ever had. I'm singing, hey there, Mitt, y'all full of shit. Now 1 year we went on vacay, headed up North Ontario, IA. Put the family in a car, what a room for me. He put me up on the roof, up there in a cage. So hey there, Mitt, on your roof I shit. Now the car's getting ugly and I damn near froze. He stops at a rest stop and sprays me with a hose. Now Mitt, he wants to be president. He thinks that he was heaven sent. He wants to be in the White House, but I'm gonna beat him there. And this was so perfect. Hey Barack, I'm abused. I need shelter. I'm singing, hey Barack. Now I got the dog vote. The people who want the dogs to ride inside. Yeah, that is the 47%. Worked out pretty good, don't you think? Time to make me the ambassador to East Dogistan. Give me a shot. But I didn't get appointed, and no question.
For Peter.
I got a question. You gotta tell me the other presidential story about the Golden Balls.
Oh, well, all right, okay. Herr Trump, down at his golf course in Florida, I was there because I was visiting a friend of mine who was a caddy from Brazil, illegal, but I can work for Trump, no problem. Don't need to have papers if I'm going to be working for him. So I was waiting to play a round of golf with my friend Valmir down there after we got in from caddying. And so I looked, oh, look at this. And there's this big temple kind of a building there and a bunch of golf balls with this really fancy golf bag with all this, painted colors and everything, leather dyed colors. And so, okay, so I put my clubs down there and started hitting. Okay, unfortunately, this was Mr. Trump's private tee. So I got run out of town on that. I was able to play with Valmir after that, but yeah, I hit a few of Trump's balls. Yeah.
Now I get the pleasure of introducing Vicki Milkey, who moved to Lincoln this summer with her husband Tom. They came all the way from Texas, but Texas was just a little bit of their life. They spent mostly in a pit stop, right, between Wisconsin and here. So we're glad you're here.
Well, Tom and I did live in northern Wisconsin for about 19 years. And while we were there, we belonged to the United Church of Christ, and we made our best friends there. Two of our friends, Bob and Melanie, we're really excited because when they got pregnant and their first baby, and baby was due around my birthday at the end of September, but Jacob ended up being born on July 2nd. He spent his first 3 months in the NICU, many close calls with his health. It was really touch and go for a long time. And it became apparent that Jacob's left side was weaker than his right. He had suffered a brain injury at birth that resulted in him having a CP. So it took him longer than most kids to hit his milestones. as he grew up, his eyesight was affected too. And his parents had to fight really hard for instance, for an aide to be assigned to him in elementary school. But enough about Jacob's disabilities. That's not Jacob's whole story at all. He turns out, we always knew he was a pretty good little singer. Turns out he had perfect pitch. He has perfect pitch. He sang in the local select boys choir. He traveled to China with them and was often selected for solos. He taught himself to play piano with 6 fingers. All the fingers on his right hand are fine, and he just used one finger on his left hand. And I swear you cannot tell the difference. He's so talented. He started composing music. He eventually went to, after high school, he went to Lakeland University in Wisconsin. He graduated from there intending to teach music, but ended up at Eaton Seminary in St. Louis. He became involved in the disability community within the UCC, which I didn't even know there was such a thing, but there is. And he continued composing and arranging church music as his side gig to have some pocket money. It became clear to him that pastoring a congregation was the most appealing thing to him. All his life, he had had to buck the odds, and training to become a pastor was no exception. But after graduation, he was snapped up by a UCC congregation in Waupun, Wisconsin. Because Jacob can't drive because of his vision, he is successfully using the local taxi service run by 2 people. And in the small town where he gets wherever he needs to go. And I think people from church help him out too. Last weekend, this is why I'm so excited to be able to get up and talk about Jacob today. He was ordained into the UCC at his home church in Neenah, Wisconsin. The service was packed. Participants included several professional musicians that he has worked with and members of the UCC Disabilities Ministry Board. This service was attended by his many friends and colleagues, and also by his elementary school aide and 2 of his NICU nurses. And his new girlfriend. Jacob is smart and sensitive and loving, and he will be a wonderful pastor. A picture of him here with one of the pastors of our Sure.
Any questions for Vicki?
Did he come to? Curious of his Mickey verse.
Nice picture.
Oh, sure.
Closer, no, closer, 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 closer.
Thank you. That's Jacob.
Okay, Ken. Did Pam make it?
No, I don't think so.
Ken and Pam were gonna tell a story together, but now Ken's gonna take care of it himself, I guess. Ken heard.
So this is not my story yet. This is my intro.
Okay.
As many of you, or some of you know, from one I spoke, I think 2 or 3 years ago, I'm a sailor. Or more accurately, I'm a grounded sailor. I grew up sailing, started on Lake Quannapout, Wakefield with my dad on a sailfish, so right close to the water. And then we graduated finally in Chesapeake Bay with a 36-foot cutter rig sloop. But this story is not about those elements. This is about courting. When Pam and I first met, she lived in New York and I lived here, and I had lots of trips on Eastern Shuttle back and forth, taking every job in New York I could. But she wanted to just see, is this guy kind of right for me? So one of the first tests I had to do was ride a horse in Central Park. And I've ridden a horse before, but you know, I can't claim to be a horseman. I survived, I didn't fall, we got back to the stable and so forth. And so I decided, well, I'll just give her a test too. I'm a sailor. She's got to come with me out sailing. Well, she actually did grow up. Her stepfather had a yacht with a crew, so she didn't have to do anything. She just had to sunbathe and eat hors d'oeuvres and stuff. So we went out. We were in Nantucket, and we went out. For those of you who know Nantucket, there is the Kotu, which wraps around and provides kind of a barrier from the ocean. So there's like a bay, and I rented or chartered, correct, a little O'Day, like Larry had, 17 foot or so, and it was an open cockpit, and we went out sailing. Well, we were going against the wind to go, as they say, up the Kotu, and the wind was getting stronger, the waves were getting larger, and every once in a while I could see the bottom. Is everything gonna be okay? Are we gonna tip over? No, we're not going to tip over. And I'm not gonna crash. No. Well, sure enough, came about a little gust, and we did heel a little bit too much, and water started pouring in over the gunnel. And I said, Pam, just get the bilge pump. Get the bilge pump. What's the bilge pump? Get the bilge pump. It's up under the forward deck. So she pulls this thing out, which is like a tube, and it has a handle and it has a spout. And she's up there. She's pumping away. She's pumping away. And I just started laughing. and actually, I start laughing, and she turns around. What are you laughing at? She's serious, thinking, how can you do this to me? Well, she was pumping the water back into the boat. I said, you just need to put the spout outside. We did end up getting married.
Any questions?
I have a question for Laura. I want to know if Pam had been here, would she have told the story the same way?
She would have, however, her panic would have been much more apparent.
What was the question for the people?
Oh, the question was, if Pam had been here, would she have told it differently? There is a follow-up story, but I'll tell that next January. Sort of
Anyone in the audience want to step forth with a 3-minute story that they just have bubbling up? We have a little time. All right.
Hello, so I'm Don Halstead. I'm the lucky guy who's been married to Gina for 35 years. Everybody knows. I've spent the last 45 years doing finance work in technology companies. So I thought it'd be very appropriate to tell the story of the best investment I ever made. Back in about 1986 is when I met Gina. And about 2 months after I met her, I had that meeting that we all fear. I was going to dinner with her parents. And this would be very appropriate to the stories earlier. Her mom was German. So I was scared. We go to dinner, I make it through the dinner. I don't embarrass myself. And I go home that evening. The next morning I got up, and that was a Saturday night. The next morning was Sunday morning. And I've always been, I never did the sleep in late thing as a teenager. I don't think I've ever slept past 6 o'clock in the morning. So I was up early. And I went to a place in Stamford, Connecticut, where we were living, called Liz Sue Bagels. Liz Sue Bagels is a place that made the bagels from scratch and supplied them to all of the hotels and restaurants in town. So I got a half a dozen bagels, and I picked up a copy of the New York Times Sunday Times. Total cost roughly $2.50 one time. Went over and I just left them on the doorstep, on Gina's doorstep. Sure enough, her parents came down, they opened the door and they saw the bagels and the newspaper. And it made her mom, my biggest fan, till the day that she died. And without a doubt, that's the best investment I can ever make.
I tell you, these stories were gonna be fabulous. What a great note to end on. I hope you will all stick around, have a few bites to eat and drinks over there and share your stories with those assembled. I want to thank Ben so much for doing this online thing. And I want to thank those of you at home. How many do we have from home?
We have 11 people, and I'm gonna give the people at home
Oh,
a
great.
chance to see RL, our timekeeper. And this is the audience.
Perfect.
And there we go.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for coming, and we will be planning, hopefully, should we do 2 or 3 in 2024? What do you think? 3. 3? Okay, so January, February, March of 2024, we'll plan to do this again. And thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Great.